Welcome everybody to our common and weekly webinar about the topic of biostasis and what we do at Tomorrow Biostasis. Today will be an introductory webinar in English. Next week will be the more advanced topics in English, and then we'll switch back to German again. Today, as I mentioned, will be introductory. So what is biostasis about? How does it work? What does the procedures? How to fund it? And basically running down from A to Z to give an introduction to the topic. If I'm not covering a topic that you would like to know more about, feel free. If you're joining us on our webpage, there's a link linking to YouTube. On YouTube, there's a chat box. So feel free to ask any question, and then I will answer these questions at the end of the talk after the initial introduction. Again, we're more than happy to answer any question, not only in the chat, but also feel free to contact us directly, contact me directly, contact the team. At the end of the talk, there will be our contact addresses, so we're more than happy to discuss this topic in person as well. And before I get started, for those people who might not be able to join for the whole time, we would like to announce to everybody that we're in October, on the 22nd to 24th of October, we're organizing again our annual conference called Biostasis. This year, of course, Biostasis 2021 will be hosted in Zurich. So if anybody is interested to dig deeper into this topic, to meet everybody in the community, to meet the researchers in this community who drive this topic forward, and so on, and of course also meet us, please go to biostasis2021.com and check out if you're interested in joining us. For now, let's dig right into to have enough time for questions in the end and start with the first slide. So first of all, maybe to briefly introduce myself, I'm Emil. I am the founder of Tomorrow Biostasis and also the president of the non-profit EBF Foundation in Switzerland. I'm a doctor by training. After doing medicine, I went into cancer research, did my doctoral thesis in cancer research, and then switched over to building tech companies, relatively not related much to medicine, even though my last one, Medlanes, was related to medicine, but always with the goal of going into the longevity field in the long run. And in fact, this was the reason why I started to study medicine in the first place. So this was always my personal intrinsic motivation. And of course now with the topic of biostasis, I'm taking a slightly different approach, or we're taking a slightly different approach to that. And the reason for that is very simple, that some people consider it as a backup solution to just taking a longevity pill at some point. I would argue that the probability of these simple pills being around anytime soon is relatively low. So the logic here would be to make sure that you have some option, and biostasis might be that backup. I hope, by the way, that the sound issue has been fixed, so the team is currently looking into it. So should it not be fixed, I'll start right again and basically redo the talk. But assuming, because I don't get any more messages, assuming that it has been fixed, last but not least, here you already see my email address. If anybody wants to reach out in person, email at tomorrowbiostasis.com. Please, again, feel free to contact us at any point. But now, without further ado, let's start and let's dig right into. Let me quickly ask, is the sound issue fixed, or do we still have sound issues? All right, seems to be fixed, so I hope that everybody is hearing now. If not, feel free to turn up the volume on your end, and if there's any problem, please let me know. All right, as I said, without further ado, let's get started. So first of all, of course, if you have never thought about this topic, and of course most of you might already have, but if not, then let's start. What is the problem in quotation marks that this longevity or biostasis topic actually solves? So I think very fundamentally, it's people would, or some, not everybody necessarily, but some people would like to live much longer than currently medically possible, right? And I would argue that fundamentally, people should have the choice of how long they would like to live, right? It should not be an externally determined factor how long you want to live or how long you can live, but I would argue that it's morally right to try to give people the opportunity to live long as they would like, right? And of course you might argue, well, you know, if you're 85 years old and you had all your life, some people might argue that's fine. I mean, I would disagree, but you know, you could argue. But of course, that's not the only people who die, right? Unfortunately, also young people die. And just to give you an idea, right, 500,000 children under the age of 5 die of cancer every year, just cancer, right? And of course, not all of that can be solved with cryopreservation, right? Because of course, there's also lower hanging fruits how you might be able to get rid of some of these deaths. But of course, our approach is this cryopreservation topic, and some people might be given, or we might be able to give some people a chance. And of course, it's very important always to talk about a chance, because this is not a 100% guarantee that will work in the end. And then some people always say, hey, you know, if I'm 90, you know, 90 or 95 even, then I have lived my life. It's important to remember that only around 1% even gets to the age of 85. Right? Of course, this goes up over time, but not that much, significantly less than some people think. Fundamentally, though, it's about giving people a chance at living much, much longer. So why would people want to live longer, right? And of course, by no means would we like to try to convert anybody and convince anybody who's not interested in this topic. But what we hear from our members is some people want to live longer because they just enjoy life, right? So they enjoy life and they would like to have this life go on for significantly longer, just to experience more, to, you know, go more hiking, be on the beach more, whatever it might be. Then there's a group of people who are interested in just seeing the future, right? Who are curious about, you know, what will society look like? What will technology be able to do? How will the world of tomorrow work and look like? And then last but not least, there's this idea, which I also agree with, that, you know, if people would be able to choose how long they live, first of all, arguably that's morally that should be a choice, and secondarily, as a second order effect, people who live longer might be, and I would argue they are, significantly more interested in, for example, caring about global warming and making sure that the world is still, you know, a good world to live in from an environmental standpoint, from a climate change standpoint, and so on and so on. If they have a personal incentive or a personal motivation to have the world positive, since they're still around. But going on from that to the next slide. 1 second. Next slide coming up in a second. So just to get a few points across in the very beginning, right? So living longer, this is not about being kept alive at all, right? This is always sometimes a criticism. So, you know, if I'm super old, why would I want to live longer? You know, I'm old, I'm fragile, I'm you know, physically and mentally not 100% fit anymore. So it's not about that, right? So it's about living longer, but with your full mental and physical capabilities, and, you know, being fully active. And of course, this might not be possible right now, but the technology in that field, luckily, gets better significantly quicker. So that is very, very possible to be able to do that in the future. Next slide, please. Then I think one point that is rather important to remember, that just because this is not a topic that is normal right now, right? Some people don't want to live longer. In cryopreservation, the amount of people who signed up for cryopreservation, of course, is, you know, you're very much a pioneer if you're interested in signing up. What is normal doesn't mean that this is good. Sometimes it's correlated, but in general, these are two generally fundamentally different, so different concepts. So just saying, you know, cryopreservation isn't normal. Yeah, if you mean normal, if you mean by normal that not everybody or not a large majority or even a significant minority of people currently do it, yeah, I would say, yeah, I agree. But then again, this is always how progress and new things work and how new things come into the world. Next slide, please. And then again, I think in medicine and in technology, it's always important to remember this argument that, you know, this will not work. And first of all, there's this argument that this doesn't work. And then the second argument is, well, this cannot work. And So if anybody wants to argue that cannot work, then, well, I feel like they need good arguments, because I have not heard any sound argument why this cannot work in principle. Just the opposite. I would argue that the consensus is that, yeah, we cannot revive someone from cryopreservation right now, but there's no fundamental reason why it shouldn't be possible in principle. And then usually in medicine, that's exactly how it works, right? You've been seeing this picture of the first human heart transplantation. And very much like a heart transplantation, right? If you would have talked to doctors, 20, 30 years before the first heart transplantation, probably a lot of people would also said, hey, this is impossible. Taking one heart from a human and putting it into another human sounds pretty weird at first sight. But just how that sounded very impossible or weird in the first place, at some point then it became possible, it became science, it became an active research topic, and now, of course, it's a very common topic that no one would want to miss this technology. And of course, this is not only a topic that is very new, right? So this idea of cryopreservation has actually been around for quite some time, even going so far back to Benjamin Franklin, that described in one of his letters something that is very, very similar to cryopreservation. Of course, he used slightly different words, but fundamentally this idea of being revived, of being somehow preserved and then being revived in the future. And then, of course, in Silicon Valley and in the US, everybody who's wealthy there seems to be significantly interested in living much longer, which I think also fundamentally makes sense. And luckily, you don't need to be super rich to go after this topic. And as you can see in the study that we did, which you see with the 26% on the bottom of the slide, this is a large study that we did in Germany and in the US, where we asked people, okay, so how many people are interested in this topic? And even to this very, very strong statement, right, I would like to live indefinitely if I could, which of course is indefinitely, or even forever, which is of course very, very long. 26 of the people said, hey, I agree with that statement. And if you phrase it a bit more, not as aggressively, then the agreement is significantly higher. So what I want to say is, yes, this is still a pioneer topic, but even a really large minority of people already agree that this is something they would consider, or even this is something they would like to do. And this is, of course, what we're going after, and why we're presenting this topic and making this topic happen in Europe. So how does it actually work, right? Biostasis, sometimes also called cryopreservation, sometimes also called cryonics. How does it actually work? So what you in principle do is, if due to any medical disease or accident or whatever it might be, where current medical technology can't save the patient, where the disease, let's take cancer for example, if that leads to the patient's death, then after the patient has been legally pronounced legally dead, you start a very, very fast cool-down procedure. And by doing this fast cool-down procedure, you basically first limit and then later stop the degradation process in the body. So what's important to remember is that what we call death or being dead changes over time. So legal death doesn't necessarily mean that on a cellular level the patient is already fully dead and can never be brought back, right? So arguably the body, even though legal death has been pronounced, with future technology, this body is still able to maintain life. Right? And this might sound a bit, like science fiction initially, but if you think back into the past, there was a time, and this is not even long ago, in the 1960s, CPR, like cardiopulmonary resuscitation, chest thump and so on, was the first time used. Right? Before that, if someone's heart stopped, people were like, okay, so this is it, right? The person is dead, can't be brought back. Now it's medical malpractice if you don't do CPR. Right? So what we consider death and what we consider unrecoverable death changes over time. And of course, the deciding factor is if the cellular structure and the connections in the brain, most importantly, are still in a state how well they were before you died. And this is what you do with these extremely low temperatures. You basically stop the degradation processes on a cellular level. And then you give cryoprotective agent. And that cryoprotective agent is there that you can cool down under 0 degrees and make sure that you can stop all these processes without having any ice formed. When ice forms, and that's sometimes, of course, this whole field is called, you know, you're being frozen, or I want to be frozen, or that person wants to be frozen, or whatever. It's very important to note that, in fact, a lot of the stuff that we do is to actually avoid that being frozen. So, in fact, nothing gets frozen, or at least that's in an ideal scenario, nothing gets frozen due to this cryoprotective agent being used. And now, of course, the logic is that you wait as long as you need to until, first of all, the underlying disease that led to your death, or the underlying accident that led to your death in the first place, can be cured. And secondarily, until cryopreservation can be reversed and until people can be revived from cryopreservation. And that might take a good amount of time. So that will definitely not be in a couple of decades. So this is not 20, 30, 40 years in the future. At least that's my estimation. And when I say estimation, I really mean almost, you know, speculation. There's very limited data to actually predict when it will be possible, but it will definitely take a good amount of time until that is possible. But well, once you're cryopreserved, you have the time. There is no limit. There's no degradation going on anymore. So going to the next slide. When you now look, one second, when you now look a bit at the technology, I already mentioned that nothing gets frozen. And this is very important to always repeat, because if you look at the picture on the left here, this is a very typical picture if we have any articles in journalists, in magazines or whatever. This is always one of the pictures that is being chosen by the editors or journalists or whatever. And of course, this picture, it couldn't, so it gives an idea what we're talking about, but technologically, it couldn't be further from the truth, right? So there's no frozen, there's no, you know, brains in ice cubes or whatever you might believe. Just in fact, it's the exact opposite, right? So it's a process called vitrification. So you give this cryoprotective agent to vitrify the tissue, vitrify the organs, vitrify the brain, which practically speaking is an amorphous state, a state of deep cooling without ice crystallization. And that makes it possible that organs and brain and everything can be maintained for very, very long periods of time without any degradation processes, without any metabolism going on, without any, you know, cells getting destroyed further or anything like that. And as I mentioned before, you can practically maintain that if you just maintain cooling, you can practically maintain that state indefinitely, as long as it takes, even if it takes hundreds of years, until cryopreservation can be reversed. So going to the next slide, let's look at an overview of how this actually works from a, you know, step-by-step process. So let's say someone says, hey, you know, this is something I'm super interested in. What would they actually need to do to well, consider this topic, right? So initially, you would just sign up, right? You sign up with us or with any other organization. You need to make sure that you have a contract in place. You need to make sure that you have funding in place. We will come to that on the next slides, to pay for cryopreservation. And then the organization would start doing monitoring, make sure that, you know, we know, or anybody else who is a cryopreservation provider, makes sure that they know should something happen to you. Let's say now, worst case, you die to you know, car accident or due to a disease or whatever it might be, then one of the biostasis response teams, one of the emergency teams would be dispatched. They can then legally take over the body once the patient has been legally pronounced dead. It's not possible to do that before, and I think this makes a lot of sense. There should be a legal boundary between these two things, between treatment to improve the conditions and hopefully have the patient live on, and cryopreservation, where you know, the goal is, yes, the patient by current medical technology is diseased, but we plan that in the future this will be reversible. So this cryopreservation biostasis response ambulance then can do already the cool down process, and then the cryopreservation procedure is done at the latest when you arrive at the facility. In our case, for example, in Switzerland, but can also be somewhere else. For example, in the US, there are a couple of organizations, and there's one in China, and you know, all over the world there are a couple. Now, this cryopreservation procedure is then the cool down further and under the so-called glass transition temperature, which is the temperature that brings the tissue into this vitrified state. And now you're being kept at that temperature, well, until revival is possible, as I mentioned before. So these are the high-level steps. So signing up with us it's very simple, right? It can all be done digitally. It's a very quick process, right? The first steps takes a couple of minutes. You become a member with us. You can pay with PayPal, right? Most people pay on a monthly basis. I'll show you in a second. This luckily is not a topic that is prohibitively expensive for most people. So it's a pretty simple process. And then we automatically send you the contract. We automatically send you the documents for funding your cryopreservation contract. And then all of these steps are online. And then we would advise you to add on a last will and a patient advance directive. That should be done non-online. That cannot easily be done online. So that should be done in paper. But it's not absolutely needed. The sign-up process is purely online. Now, funding is a very important topic here. I mentioned it a couple of times. So funding works in the following way, right? So when you sign up with us, you pay a monthly membership fee, and that membership fee is there so that we can maintain the medical teams, maintain the training, the equipment, and of course also cover everything else. The second part of what you pay on a monthly basis, you can also pay it up in a lump sum, as you can see here. That is the price of cryopreservation. Our typical price is around 200,000 euros. So that unfortunately is not a small amount of money, right? You can do it a bit cheaper. You can also go a bit higher, but 200,000 euros is what we're focusing on with storage in Switzerland. Now, why does it need to be so much money? The reason for that is around 60% of that money is being given to a non-profit foundation in Switzerland that maintains cryopreservation for an indefinite time frames. And they need this large amount because only the interest on that amount is being used to pay for, the annual cost, to make sure that you never need to reduce the money so that you can, well, maintain it indefinitely, however long it takes. And 40% of that money is being used for the medical team, the consumables, the cryoprotective agent itself, and so on and so on. And as I said, if someone is interested in this topic, this is relatively complex, more than happy to discuss in person as well. Now, of course, 200,000 euros on the next slide. 200,000 euros is relatively expensive for a good amount of people, right? And some people would not be able to maybe easily afford that. The slide broke apart a bit, so it's a bit skewed. So don't really look at the brackets and the numbers too closely. I'll explain how it works. So in the middle you see in age, like different ages, right? On the right side around 100 years, on the left side around 0 years. So again, the top side where it says funding through term life insurance, that should reach from around 20 years to around 75 years. So again, like the slide is not 100%, it got broken a bit. So from around 20 years to around 75 years, one of the good ways of how to fund your cryopreservation contract is through term life insurance. So term life insurance is a risk insurance. It's pretty affordable on a monthly basis. So I showed, like, our packages are 35 euros by now, 50 and 100 euros a month. Out of that, always included this 25 euros, that is our membership fee. The rest goes to the insurance. Now, should one of the customers, one of our members die, the insurance pays out in these cases, in the 50 euros case, for example, 200,000 euros that is being used for the cryopreservation. Now you might think, well, how can they pay out 200,000 euros if it's only 50 euros? The slides just broke apart, so we're getting back to the slides in a second. How can someone pay out 200,000 euros if I'm only paying in 50 euros a month? And the logic is that this is a risk insurance. So you have these time frame. Let's say you sign up when you're 30 until the age of 70, for example. Now, should you die in that time frame until the age of 70, then the insurance pays out 200,000 euros. But, and they do this from the first day, right? You sign up today, the insurance approves your contract, and then the first day after that, they would already pay out the full amount, even though you've only paid in 50 euros once, given you've given all your medical information correctly and so on. So until this time frame again, they pay out the whole amount. If you die after, if you die at, let's say, 71 or 75 or whatever, they pay out nothing. This is why it can be so cheap, because it's a risk insurance, just like, you know, your car insurance. If you take out car insurance and you have a crash tomorrow, then the insurance pays. But if, you know, the term of the car insurance runs out, then they don't cover you anymore after. Now, of course, it's important to say, hey, but what happens if I die after, right? I still want to be cryopreserved. How do I fund that? Now, this is where this part on the bottom comes in. Most people who are relatively young, they would not be interested in paying 200,000 euros directly to us. And honestly, we wouldn't even advise anybody to do that, because I think it makes more sense if you just keep your money and, you know, invest it, or, you know, buy a house or whatever it might be. But if you're interested in cryopreservation, then, you know, take out term life insurance. We have a partner there, an insurance company with which you can do that. But you can use any other insurance company as well. It's just an offer. It's absolutely not a requirement to go with that insurance company. Now, you do that till the age of 70, about, can also be 60. Now, first of all, when you're 60 or 70, usually most people have significantly higher net worth at that point. So at that point, paying 200,000 euros is significantly easier. Also, we would hope, and this is what we're actively working on, not only hope, to make cryopreservation significantly cheaper at that point. We can't guarantee that, but once you get more members, you can make the procedure cheaper. At least that's a clear plan of what we plan to do, but again, we cannot guarantee it. So let's assume when you're 70, it's still 200,000 euros, right? Now, you might have 200,000 euros that you can just pay out of pocket at that point, but I think a more prudent thing, and we advise our members to do that, is we contact everybody around 20 years before your term life insurance runs out and tell you, hey, you should start a savings plan, for example, a whole life insurance or direct payment or whatever it might be, to be able to pay when your term life insurance runs out. You can also extend your term life insurance coverage. In our case, up to around the age of 85. But that always requires you not having any new medical conditions and so on. So there are multiple options. More than happy to discuss this in person as well. As I said, all this funding topic is a relatively complex topic. So this is just a first introduction. If anybody has questions on that for now, then also post them in the YouTube chat, and then we're going to answer them at the end of the talk. Now, one of the questions that we're always getting is, okay, so but why should I sign up today? Right? Why don't I just wait? You know, I would pay 50 euros a month as an example. Why would I do this today? Why don't I do this, you know, when I'm older, and then I pay for less time? So there are three reasons for that, why this arguably doesn't make that much sense. So first of all, for the insurance cost, if you sign up today, or if you sign up later, and the example here is, let's say you have someone signing up at 30 till 75, and you have someone signing up at 50 till 75. The price difference between these two people over the whole periods of time is around 1%. So you don't actually pay significantly more, if you sign up earlier. And the reason for that is that the insurance has a strong bias of getting your money early. Because of course, how the insurance makes money is by investing your money, and then the return of that money, part of that goes to the insurance. So the insurance always has a strong bias of getting money early. That's why they basically give you kind of a discount if you sign up early. The second reason is, let's say you decided for yourself, hey, I would like to sign up for cryopreservation, but I'll just do it later. In the case that you get a serious illness, you might not be insurable anymore. So you might not be able to get insurance coverage in the future, because the insurance, of course, only accepts, at least term life insurance. There are certain diseases that make you uninsurable with term life insurances. So there's a potential risk. And then last but not least is, let's say you say, hey, you know, I'm 30, I'm 35, I'm 40, the probability of dying isn't that high. And yeah, I would say I agree. But then again, unfortunately, also young people get cancer, or young people get hit by a car and die, right? So the advantage of term life insurance is, if you, as I said, if you sign up today, right, and the insurance approves your contract, and the second after that the contract has been approved, you're fully covered. So you protect yourself against, yes, low probability maybe, but at least for me and for people who are interested in this topic, high risk things that you know, they die due to an off chance and then don't have cryopreservation coverage. So again, these topics, including funding, more than happy to discuss in person. Now, second step is, let's say something happens and we need to dispatch one of our teams. This is one of our teams here, what you can see on the picture. This is the one here in Berlin. Actually, this is exactly outside of the office where we are right now. We have a partner team in Amsterdam. We will have a third team soon in Zurich to cover then basically Europe with Amsterdam, Berlin, and Zurich. And then with that, you can relatively easily cover all of Europe. Soon, or in the future, there will be more teams, but for that, there need to be a few more members around. Now, these teams are always fully equipped to do the full procedure, the full cool down, start the full cool down on site, and then while being driven to the facility in Switzerland, at that point, they will then do the actually cryopreservation and long-term storage. Now, storage on the next slide. Storage will, as I said, in our case, be in Switzerland. We're currently in the last steps of building a large, new and built from scratch specialized cryopreservation facility. To my knowledge, it's the first one that has been purpose-built worldwide for this topic. There is a project in the US, but it's not going to be as done as quick. So this will be around the end of the year, early next year, will be fully operational, which will be full long-term storage, operation room, lab space, and so on in the north of Zurich. And for the people who come to the conference in October, we'll do a tour. Might not be fully done in October, but to give everybody an idea how it will look. And all of this stuff always is run by non-profit foundations to make sure that there's the maximum level of security and stability for the long term. Last but not least, on the next slide, so when you now okay, so how will that work in the future, right? So first of all, I'm being asked sometimes, okay, so what's the probability that revival will be possible, you know, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 100 years, and whatever? And the answer to that is, I don't know. Right, and not only me, no one knows, right? And it's very difficult to predict scientific progress. Progress is always easy to predict if it's linear, right? If you just need to do this step and you know the next step and it's linear progress. But for a topic like cryopreservation revival, it's not a linear process, it's a step process, right? You have a new technology and suddenly you have this scientific finding and then you get significantly better and so on. So predicting that, I think, it's not really sound. It's not a sound prediction to make any reasonable prediction. My argument fundamentally is always that as long as there is no fundamental reason why something doesn't work, then there's a very good chance that it will work at some point, right? And this, I think, is where cryopreservation belongs to that group. And in the end, once you're cryopreserved, time doesn't really matter anymore, right? So there's no further degradation, nothing is going on, so you can maintain that state practically indefinitely. But there's significant research to be done, and one of the things that tomorrow and also the foundations do is conduct that research. We have currently multiple research projects going on for better cryoprotective agents, for better storage solutions, and so on, and in the future there will be significantly more to do our part that this will actually happen. And then, of course, once you're in the future, then I think there's a good chance to argue that the future will be a positive future, right? The future society will have developed in a positive way, and should not all the money be needed for cryopreservation or maintenance of cryopreservation, and that money is being returned as kind of, in quotation marks, starter money. If at the end of the life you say, hey, I got relatively wealthy, I would like to bring part of that money into the future with me, then in the future there will be a wealth management organization, which we will probably bring live and announce sometimes in the end of 2022 or 2023, where you can put money in and then do basically wealth management and then have that money returned in the future once you're being revived. Last but not least, I mentioned it already multiple times, and again, this is very important for us. We're very much focused on building a community around this topic. This is why we're more than happy to always discuss. You see our telephone number, you see my email address and my Calendly link. Feel free to reach out, not necessarily if you just want to sign up, right? I mean, of course, also if you want to sign up, please get in contact, but also more than happy if you just want to learn more about this topic, if you want to talk about this topic, if you want to understand what we do better, and so on. And since I'm coming to the end of my slides, quick reminder to go into the YouTube chat if you have any questions about one of those topics that we have just briefly touched onto, if you want to dig deeper somewhere, or if you have a topic that I didn't, or a question that I didn't cover at all, send us a quick question and then we're going to cover the questions at the end of the talk. And one more time, I already announced it in the beginning of the talk, at June 3rd, I think the date is not correct. It's basically today in a week. It's Thursday, whatever the Thursday next week is, at 6 p.m. Central European Standard Time. So basically today in 1 week, we have the advanced webinar where we dig deeper into the topics, like more how are cryoprotective agents being used, how does storage work in detail, what different storage solutions are there, and so on and so on. If you want, feel free to join that. You can register under tomorrowbiostasis.com/events, just like you did for this event. Feel free to join us. And now, last but not least, we'll go into Q&A. If you have any questions, just post it in the chat. All right, let's go into questions. So the first question was if cancer research helps you in your present job. So to a degree, yes, but not directly, right? So I think the important part about having done research in the past is that you have a good understanding to evaluate, to a degree at least, scientific findings and have an idea of how to organize research projects and so on. So, of course, a lot of what we do is not about cancer research at all, not even really related, right? I think what universities and studying and doing research and all of that mostly helps you is build a thought process, how you approach topics. And I think for that, my research background helps me a lot. So I think my three backgrounds come together well in this topic, right? So on one hand, research science is very important here. You need to make sure that we actually improve the quality and do research. So that's the research side. The medical side, of course, is quite important as well, because cryopreservation is practically a medical procedure, right? You use a heart-lung machine just like you would in an operation room to do the perfusion, right? So a lot of that knowledge comes from that side. And then last but not least, the entrepreneurship part of my career and running the tech companies over the last years helps a lot to know how to build a company, how to build a company structure that is stable and sound, how to build an organization that can grow and is set up to grow and all of that. So I think these three parts work quite well together to make this thing work in the end and make it large. And again, not make it large to sell the company or to make anybody wealthy or anything like that. It's a purely mission-driven company, right? So the primary goal of this company is to grow big, but not just as its purpose in its own, but to be able to fund research. Because there needs to be significantly more research, unfortunately, in this space than there is right now. Significantly more research money. Yeah. So, by the way, if I don't answer a question comprehensively enough, right? If I don't understand the question correctly and I don't answer it to give you the information that you were looking for, please let me know and then I'll come back to it. Next question would be, does tomorrow biostasis help patients to come and live close to one of the teams or the facility if they're sick and close to death? So we absolutely do. There is no structure to it. So we don't have, for example, specific, hospice location or hospital location close to the teams or to the facility. But should that be ever the case, we would support people as much as we can with advice and with also tangible help. Later on, at least in Switzerland, the plan is also to have collaboration partners where you then can live close to the facility should you decide to. We will probably not run this, but we would organize as much as we can, and if that should be the case right now, we're more than happy to help with any advice, any tangible help that we can. Next question is, do you offer brain-only cryopreservation? So no, we do not. So we only exclusively do whole body cryopreservation. The reason for that is partly medical, partly that so if you want to make this topic larger, if you want to bring it more into the mainstream, for people who have thought about a lot about this topic, brain only or neuro only might make sense. But if you want to broaden the scope and bring it more into the mainstream, it's significantly easier to accept if you just do whole body. And this is why we decided that we do whole body exclusively. If someone really would like to do brain only, feel free to reach out. We know people who do brain storage, also at significantly lower prices. And in the end, I think that's everybody's decision what they would like to do, so we're more than happy to connect you to them. Next question is, personally, I live in Germany. Isn't it prohibited by law to manage the remaining dead body of other things than buried or cremated? Deutsches Totenrecht. So, by the way, if you're German, we do these webinars in German as well, or feel free to reach out and then we can talk in German as well, because I'm German, so we can also happily talk in German. So, cryopreservation is not an accepted form of burial, right? Or death care. Death care, only burial or cremation is allowed. So only these two. It's exclusively these two. So in Germany, in other countries, it's more complex. So it's important to note that first of all, we do not do storage in Germany. We do storage in Switzerland. The other point being is that even if you would want to do storage in Germany, cryopreservation is in most countries accepted as a research project, right? So you don't actually bury someone or do death care. You have a research project with an indefinite time frame. So under that framework, and of course, we have multiple expert opinions from law firms, from Switzerland, from Germany, and so on. So from a research standpoint, you can do that indefinitely, and it's always research. It's the same in the US, actually, by the way. It's also classified as research. So from a legal framework standpoint, I'm not aware of any country where it doesn't work. There probably are some countries somewhere, but I'm not in Europe. In all countries, there is a legal framework how you can do it. Next question would be, you mentioned during the time someone is preserved, there's no more degradation, but what about muscle and its activity? Will the effect be the same as someone entering Earth after time and space? So no, it won't be the same. So, but that doesn't mean there is no damage or no degradation, right? So there is degradation processes, but you cool down to stop them as quick as possible. But it's a different type of degradation process than what you have in space. So what happens in space to muscles, of course, is since you don't use the muscles, the body is running the metabolism still and basically uses the energy. I mean, this is of course a super oversimplification. Uses the energy for something else and says, hey, these cells, apparently we don't need them. We don't need to maintain them, practically speaking. Muscle fibers basically grow by being used, right? And if you don't use them, well, kind of the body says, or the processes work in a way where then they're not being maintained. So in cryopreservation, let's say you were super muscular when you go into cryopreservation. The muscle fibers still stay exactly the same. No muscle fibers go away. That doesn't mean they'll all be in perfect shape when you're being revived, and probably they aren't, right? There's probably some repair needed, and when I say probably, I mean yes, there's going to be some repair with some advanced technology is going to be needed. But it's not the same that these muscle fibers will all be gone, right? In fact, they will all be exactly there. Next point would be, okay, the second line is the question, I think. The question is, this is not only cryopreservation, but also research what is great. Are you going to also make specific research with the cryopreserved bodies? No, there's never any research with cryopreserved bodies. It's very important. And when I say, of course, the cryopreservation itself is a research project, right? But this only is ended once revival is possible. So there is no further research except for with these bodies. There's no research, any research for organ transplantation or whatever else you could come up with, with people who decided that they want to be cryopreserved and donated their body for cryopreservation for then being revived in the future. So there's a clear separation on where research is being done to understand cryopreservation better, and research what is done on people who, or how the effect of cryopreservation is a research project. So it's a clear separation between these two things. The next question is, when cryoprotectants reach the human brain, it shrinks, dehydrates. Is the connectome, the neural physiology, still intact? So yes, so in fact, currently, with current technology, the shrinking of the brain and the dehydration is a metric of quality. So if you have more dehydration, it's actually a metric that shows better cryopreservation. And the reason for that is that what the cryoprotective agent does is it draws the water out of the tissue and replaces the rest of the water to make sure that there is no water that can form ice crystals. So currently that's actually, as I said, a quality metric. In the future, the downside of that is that now you have some morphological change. Most likely, as we understand it today, this morphological change is isometric. So it's basically not that, it's not like that, it's like that. So once you would now hydrate that tissue again, it would just do the opposite. So of course this is partly theoretical. So the mindset is like how you have a foam material that can draw up water or compress and then draw up water to basically go back to its original form. So that's partly theoretical, but this is currently how technology works. So one of the research directions that we're going currently after in regards to cryoprotective agents is creating cryoprotective agents that don't do dehydration to that degree while still being able to not have any ice form. So how we understand currently, everything shrinks a bit, but the connectome, so the connections, the synaptic and dendritic connections between cells, between neurons, stays the same. It's just being compressed. So that cannot be proven to like 100% in every case, but by and large, that is how we currently understand what happens when it's dehydrated. Yeah, thanks for answering the question. Yeah, more than happy to. So if there are any more questions, we're also hitting our 7 p.m. Endpoint quite well. But I'm more than happy to, of course, stay a bit longer if there are questions. So feel free to post any question that you might still have. If not, I would like to invite everybody one last time, and I saw questions I will come to in a second, one last time to the Biostasis conference. We just launched the first early bird ticket, so currently you can have the full conference for 99 euros, biostasis2021.com. Take a look. Everybody, maybe not everybody, but 99% or 95% of everybody in cryopreservation worldwide will be there as speakers, just as they were last year, and actually more speakers this year. So it's a very good conference to dig deeper and learn to get to know the community. The next step, one of the questions that I saw was, do you use MRI or CT scanning technology at chemical preservation state to ensure maximum tissue penetration? So CT and MRI scans are being used, and also by us, to ensure quality, to basically have a quality metric. But they're not being used while doing the perfusion. And the reason for that is logistical, right? Running a CT scanner while doing perfusion is basically prohibitively complex, and you can't really do it. Same with an MRI. You could imagine doing it, but it would be so much more expensive that it wouldn't be realistic, at least currently. So, actually in our case, CT scans are being used to, and the facility will be equipped for that, to do quality scans. We have a partner in Germany who has an MRI scanner, where you can also do MRI scans, but in most cases CT scans are actually better. During perfusion, the perfusion is controlled with what is called a cerebral oximeter. So basically it measures flow and oxygenation through the skull. With that, you can, to a degree, control during perfusion if perfusion is, reaching every part. I hope that was the question. So during perfusion, scanning technology is not used. You can use cerebral oximeters, and you can also use theoretically ultrasound. And then for quality check, CT or MRI scans can be used. In our case, it will be a CT scanner. All right, one last time, please reach out to us. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have or any follow-ups. Otherwise, join us next week or at the conference in October. Until then, I would like to thank everybody who's joined us today, and see you next time. Have a good evening.